Little Horse and Big Conversation. Welcome to Little Horse and Big Conversation, where we give them their say, let the horse guide the way. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, we have the choice, so let's give them a voice. Here at Little Horse and Big Conversation, Little Horse and Big Conversation.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Little Horse Big Conversation podcast with your hosts Ross Cooper and Amy Mitchell. And today we have a first. We have Kate Lemon from the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and Rina Quinlan from Rina Quinlan Research and Rewilding Consultancy. Kate, Rina, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
So, aside from doing rock, paper, scissors, would you guys like to start off and tell us a little bit about yourself? Shall we go in alphabetical order? Kate, would you like to fire away?
Sure, no problem. So I work for Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and I have done now for nearly 25 years. Not quite sure where that's gone. And my background has always been in practical land management. So, I started with the trust managing the nature reserves and doing all the practical work on reserves with teams of volunteers. And over the years, I've gradually taken a slightly hands-off approach to the point now where then I was managing regions, managing areas, suites of reserves, working in partnership on landscape scale with lots of different landowners. And now I run our Rewilding Delivery team, which is effectively a consultancy service through the Wildlife Trust. We're not a separate business, we never will be, but we are the sort of commercial side of Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. And with that, I brought with me the farming enterprise that we've had at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. Pretty much since I've been there, we've had livestock, but about 14 years ago, we made the decision to really sort of go big or go home and invested in cattle, quite a lot of Hebridean sheep. And then more recently, we've expanded the cattle herd. We haven't got any sheep anymore, but we have our Exmoor ponies, which Rina helped facilitate the arrival of some of those. And Ross came down to Exmoor on an infamous road trip to pick up some as well. All the way down the motorway with a cattle trailer on. It takes a long time. So that's where I am today, really. My team deliver all of the practical conservation work on DWT reserves, but we also work for a number of other clients as well, and they can be large corporate clients. So we work with Toyota, we work with Nestle, we work with Nestle up in Buxton with Buxton Water, we work with Severn Trent on a number of sites, local authorities, individual landowners with a few hectares, anybody that's got land and wants some advice or some practical delivery, conservation work, then we're your gang. And the cattle and the ponies feature a lot in this as well.
Excellent. Thank you,
That's
Kate.
very interesting.
That is. We're going to have a lot to talk about in a moment.
We are, yeah.
Rina, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. So thank you for having me on. My main work at the moment is I'm a consultant, so I run my own consultancy business, and I basically advise on large herbivores within rewilding projects and nature recovery projects. So clients that I work for include NEP Estate, which is the famous rewilding project down in Sussex, and as Kate mentioned, the ponies that we sent over to Derbyshire came from our project there. And I've worked at NET for about 9 years now as a consultant, just helping them out with the Exmoors and also doing wildlife guiding and other things. I also do work with the Forestry England. They've got some really exciting, massive areas of nature recovery they're working on as part of their forest wilding programmes. That's been really exciting. And lots of other clients, including private landowners, all parts of the country, and Chester Zoo, and some really exciting projects there. My background wasn't always in rewilding conservation. I changed careers about 10 years ago. And previous to that, it was actually in the equine industry and sort of more commercial management within the equine industry. So got a sort of long history with horses, but really pivoted about 10 or so years ago when I sort of realised how important it was to recover nature, not just in sort of global sense, but also here in Britain. So, yeah.
That's
awesome.
Amazing.
Thanks, Rina.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I mean, I when Ross said that he'd invited you both to come on, I was really excited about it because I'm very keen on conservation and trying to improve biodiversity in domestic horse settings
Yeah.
because like I've often said to Ross that there is so much land in the UK that is given over to grazing horses that is so badly managed,
Yeah.
and that I my horses are on a little track system, and in the middle paddocks we're always planting wildflower seeds, and you just see the improvements to the soil and the amount of insects that we get in the summer, and I just think that there is so much that we as domestic horse owners could do, and what a difference it could make if everybody made a few little changes.
And it's like a win-win-win. I mean, I'm sure we're going to come over to this, but it's like what's good for the land and for nature is just amazing for horses. And it's something I'm really passionate about. And I've done quite a lot of, just in the last few years, working on that, where I'm trying to use what we're learning about horses in rewilding and our kind of natural herd structures, natural environment for horses, and how that can be applied to domestic horses. I rent 10 acres off the Nep estate, actually, which surprisingly was very overgrazed initially, and when I took it on, and been working to try and improve nature just on basically land that's adjacent to the big rewilding project. So yeah, so much there, and it's just win-win all round. Horses benefit hugely from having more nature around them, being thought of as part of nature.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just kind of, it's a mental shift, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
And once you kind of get that idea, it's lovely. I mean, I only have just under 4 acres, so it's a really small piece of land. But by changing the management, the difference has been huge. I just think it's so exciting, and as you say, it's brilliant for the horses as well. So why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try and do something a bit differently? That's yeah.
I think there's some really interesting changes that are coming into the equine industry, and I think one that I've seen over the years is the approach to wormers and the use of wormers, which now fecal egg testing is it's sort of on everyone's radar, and it's so easy to do. And I'm not going to name check brands, but I use a very popular one that is available to buy an all seasons pack, and I'm sure
Can't imagine who that could be.
And I know my local vets also do it, but I just get the pots that I pop in the post, I send off, I get the results back sometimes within 24 hours. That company don't sell wormers, so they have no interest in telling me to buy products that I don't need. They'll offer guidance if I need it, but I've got my horses onto a 0 worm count now, simply through paddock rotation, simply by poo picking. But I don't poo pick too much. This company is really proactive about telling people about the importance of soil health and dung beetles. And actually, whilst poo picking is a really important method when we've got small areas of land to keep probably large numbers of horses on, it's also really important not to do it every day, to give the dung beetles a chance. And actually the best thing you can do is stop reaching for those ivermectin wormers, and actually think about whether or not you need to use these products. And we've taken that approach very much with our livestock at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust as well. We have 40 cattle and 10 ponies, which are all in groups. So we have 3 groups of ponies, at least 5 to 6 different groups of cattle. At any point, we've got about 9 herds of animals anywhere in the county, but we move them quite a lot. And that also helps with the worm cycle as well. So yes, we've got the luxury of being able to break that cycle by moving animals on. But you can do it at home on small areas as well.
So do you worm count those animals?
We don't actually. No, I have done in the past occasionally, because you can worm count cattle as well as horses.
Oh, interesting.
So we have had instances where we were concerned, for example, about liver fluke when our cattle were drinking from fairly stagnant ponds, which we don't like to have them drinking from stagnant water bodies, for that reason. But no, we sort of employ more of a holistic approach, really, and it's a case of observation. And if we thought that there was a need to do a fecal egg sample, really because we think an animal is very poor and it needs worming, then we would do that. But to some extent, they can carry a natural burden of worms and still be very well. And actually they are, although they're all, people think worms are bad in horses, they are just a natural parasite that our large herbivores carry. Nobody is worming deer or hares or rabbits
No, very
bison
true.
or elk. And there is
Yeah.
an element of a tolerance to it, and they actually form an essential part of life cycle for other invertebrates and creatures as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess unless it gets out of control, there's an element of a symbiotic relationship going on
Yeah,
between
and
the
I think
two.
out of control is often it's a human-made problem because we're keeping a lot of animals on a very small parcels of
Mm,
land, a lot of cross-infection, and you see this with yards where horses come in and they're just sort of rooted, they just join a large herd. There's a livery yard down the road from me, and they have huge herds. They have 20 plus in a field, and they're huge fields. They can take this
mm,
amount, but you do think, how on earth do you manage worm control? Yeah, they can't do poo picking on that scale, but these horses never leave these big fields. So there isn't
yeah.
any element of rotation or breaking a cycle. I'm quite lucky where I keep my two horses. I probably have about 1.5 hectares, probably upwards of 3 acres that I can graze. And I've split it into paddocks with permanent electric fencing, and I rotate that round. And that is also a mechanism.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what we've learned from just the ponies at NEP has been that, the way to think about healthcare sometimes it's so much more nuanced than just a simple they have something or they don't. There's so many things they're gaining from the environment that help in keeping them healthy that quite often they can fight off little infections. They can get through, sort of parasites of different kinds, as Kate said, they're part of the ecosystem. But if you do see something that has a higher burden, if it's looking ribby, if it's something that you're worried about, then you can,
Mm,
using the fecal head count method, you have mechanisms that you can to actually measure it. And in all the time I've been at NEP, so just the last 6 years, we've had very, very few concerns about parasites. Liver fluke in cattle, which is, as Kate mentioned, that has always been a concern, and NEP has a sort of process of working with that. But in general, we don't give any wormers to our horses at all.
that's amazing.
We will do occasional fecal head counts. It's kind of more out of curiosity. I mean, the species that we're recording at NEP are vast, and actually parasites are part of the species. So when you hear really cool things like there's 1,500 species here and that parasite should be part of that. And it's only really in there when they're in excess, or as Kate said, when in small areas and you've got more domestic animals, that you're worried about it because you can't give them such a vast amount of environment to kind of self-medicate. Then that is, to me, is when I would look at intervening. But certainly in big systems like NEP, where they're getting loads out in the environment themselves, we just don't see an issue. And there's so
Yeah,
many
that's
cool
interesting.
things that the environment, I can go into it, but there's just so many cool things they get from the environment to help them with parasite loads and other things that might
Yeah.
help them as well.
Well, that's
Yeah.
something I was mentioned was the natural selection as
Mm.
well, and something we see from when using equines in conservation grazing is the different things they eat throughout the year, and we use
Mm,
that as a tool. That's actually a tool in my toolbox for managing land. So, for example, I just took two of our Exmoors to a site recently that's up on the edge of Buxton. It's incredibly important limestone grassland. It's floristically absolutely stunning. It contains a population of the rare melancholy thistle, and the landowner we've been trying to get the landowner to manage it for grazing and for wildlife for years, and they've recently put some fencing in. We put these two Exmoors on. It was a super steep site, and they both scampered straight up it, quite happy, heads down. And what was really interesting is the hawthorns are in full berry at the moment. And after having had a quick pootle round and check a few bits out, one of them started eating raspberry, which is invasive and not wanted there. And one of them started eating the hawthorn berries and having a really good
really?
itch and a rub. So that got me thinking, gosh, she's really enjoying those hawthorn berries. Did a bit of research, and there's proven scientific studies out there showing the benefit of hawthorn berries
Mm.
on circulatory disorders. It's almost like a beta blocker for horses. It can be really good for their cardiovascular system.
Mm.
And these little ponies they just know. This is what fascinates me about animals, is they just know that's what I want to go and eat. And maybe in the spring when the cow parsley is out, you'll see it. Some horses will absolutely go hammer and tongs. Or I had a little mare that absolutely loved cleavers, sticky weed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She
your
would pick
favourite.
it out bit by bit. And that's what she really wanted. That's what she really enjoyed. So I think again, with horses, domestic horses, if we can draw some parallels, let them have that choice of browse, let them have that opportunity. You know, paddocks that have got hedges where horses can actually stick their heads in and eat different things and strip bark and nibble leaves and have berries, and paddocks where we can actually allow some good different variety of vegetation to grow. Incredibly beneficial for our horses as well as the natural environment.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we have some quite big bushes along the side, and it amazes me. Like they tuck into them like there's no tomorrow sometimes,
Yeah.
and yet they're so spiky, you know, but they love it. And yeah, I really enjoy seeing what things they're choosing to pick and eat. Yeah, it has to be so much more interesting than being in a monoculture grass paddock, doesn't it? Still,
Yeah, and horses are browsers. We use our
yeah.
cattle and our horses as complementary lawn mowers. Cattle wrap their tongue around a sward. They don't have upper incisors, so they wrap their tongue around and they rip it out, and then they chew it.
Interesting.
And they're ruminants, so they'll take it into one of their first stomachs, they'll let it digest, they'll sit there and have a burp and let it digest a bit, they'll bring the cud back up, chew it again. As we well know with horses and colic, horses can't be sick. That once it's in, it's in. It's only coming out one way. And it's really important that they keep eating all the time. But obviously they're browsers, they have forward-facing teeth, incredibly tactile, mobile lips and tongue. And it's great to stand there watching them eating and picking off the tiniest little hawthorn leaves or blackberry shoots, bramble shoots in the spring because they're going for the really vitamin C, juicy, tasty stuff. Or if you've ever watched them stand there and eat blackberries in the autumn, and they can pick them off individually. And that's why they're fantastic browsers. But when we put them in these fairly sterile monoculture paddocks, you just think, gosh, that's like us being given nothing but, I don't know, dry toast for the rest of our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
We like to have a varied diet and we talk about varied diet for horses, but in reality, I think a lot of domestic horses don't get that varied diet. But again, it's so beneficial for them, but it's really beneficial for the natural environment because there'll be species they won't touch at certain points of the year because they're not palatable or they're a bit rough or a bit coarse, they don't need to. But to go back how I mentioned that we use the ponies as a tool, they're brilliant in the winter for eating scrub on these limestone grasslands in the Peak District, where we're just trying to halt that succession to a sort of scrub young woodland. We want to try and keep these open areas.
So what when you're looking at putting horses into an area, what are the kind of criteria that you're looking at to decide this is somewhere we're going to put some ponies?
I think for me, it's when I find an area. So I've been looking around some new sites recently, working with some new clients, and you come across these amazingly scrubby areas, and a diverse plant diet is the best thing you can give a horse. You know, they're evolved grazers and browsers, you know, and they've been that evolution process has been about 20 million years. And you hear sometimes quite flippantly people say things like they can't eat grass, they can't eat that, you know, and it really is frustrating because it's such a more complex issue that it's just not as simple to sort of say that. So if I go to a site and I generally the areas I can be looking at are anything from, you know, sort of 20, 30 hectares up to 6,000 hectares. So the really different areas. That's more for the rewilding nature recovery. For close at home, like I said, I'm looking at 10-acre sites when it comes to my own horses when I've been looking for places to rent and things like that. So they're really, really different if you're looking, you know, for horses in rewilding. And I think we have to always realize that not everybody has access to these amazing big areas. But in terms of plant communities, the more diverse, the better. They eat all sorts of different plants, and it's so much more nuanced. Like the biggest question I get asked from clients is like, what are they going to eat, and will they eat this plant, and will they eat that plant? And it's so much more nuanced. Plants are made up of all sorts of compounds, and you have these primary compounds and secondary compounds, and they're all full of nutrients and different levels of, you know, like you get toxicities in some of the plants as well. And to just say, oh, that one's toxic and that one's nutritious is just so making it far too simplistic. So I think what's really exciting is when you have such a diverse area and the horses can go in, they have what I would call a sort of inner nutritional wisdom, and they simply just know what to eat. And I've worked with so many different breeds, and and I've had my own horses that are sort of thoroughbred crosses, and they all seem to have this innate wisdom. And the only thing that I'll say, when you sort of, as a bit of a, I guess, part of thinking about domestic horses, is we don't know the history of that domestic horse, and it may have underlying health issues, ulcers, all sorts of gut issues. It may have been mistreated, had traumas, it may have been stabled for long periods, not have any social skills, all of that kind of thing. So all of that feeds into whether or not your individual horse that you have is suitable to go out and just eat all the plants that it chooses. But generally, I find that it's not really a breed thing. It's effectively, if you have a good diverse plant for them, they will just innately know what to eat. There's amazing things that even in their whiskers, the whiskers can send out these sort of neuro pathways up to the brain that help them signal. And I'm sure Kate as well, we've all seen that, where a horse will take a mouthful or something and just delicately can out-pop a sort of an autumnal leaf that's gone a bit dry or something it doesn't want to eat. And it's just managed to eat everything else. We have huge concerns about horses eating ragwort in neck. It's probably the most common question, because we do just get tons of ragwort. And I find horses graze really closely up to ragwort and just know not to touch it. They have no interest in the leaves and the stems and the flowers. And it's like they just, it's pretty smelly, and I'm sure it tastes bad. So that is a clear indicator to them that it's not something they want to eat. But it just seems so much more than that they can actually selectively choose to graze around it and just leave that plant and be very precise about what they choose to eat or not. And I think just trusting them to be able to do that is a huge part of kind of what I call the great unlearning, which I think we alluded to right at the beginning. But it's like everything you learn as you were maybe growing up as a horsey person, you've had to unlearn it. And the biggest thing that I've learned from observing horses in nature is just how much we can actually trust them to know what to eat, providing we provide the right environment for them to be in, really.
And I think, a lot of great points there. I think we do have such an element of social conditioning about how we see horses, about how, not just how we train them, but how we manage them. And if it's not in that select box where they have got grass, they've got hay, and they might have a hedgerow, anything out of that little remit is very foreign to us. So therefore the horse mustn't tolerate it or mustn't touch it.
Yeah, definitely. And what's really interesting is I'll be out riding with my friend and my horse will be scoffing away, and I'll be going, oh, well, he's eating so-and-so today, and I'll be naming plants, and she's like, oh, but you're an ecologist, it's really easy for you, you know what all these plants are. And so I've started teaching her and my kids, and it's like, well, it's actually, you don't need to be an amazing botanist to know the most common species that we see. So I used to have a horse that one of my kids' ponies that absolutely adored hazel, and he would ferret out in the bushes to find hazel leaves and eat. So they now know what hazel looks like, and they've learnt other basic species as well. But my horse actually is terrible, because we'll be riding down the farm drive where we are, and he'll try and eat the cherry laurel hedge around the farmer's garden. So there is an element of self-selection that you do despair at. Ross knows my horse. He's a big lad. He likes his food. So I do have to have a little bit of, hang on a minute, why are you trying to eat that? But he will happily eat things like oak leaves, sycamore leaves, all the things they're not meant to eat, bracken, but they're not poisonous in the sense that he's going to drop down dead because he's had a mouthful of bracken. It's a case of, well, actually, different things at different time of year, and we know that bracken actually is a really useful source of forage when it's not sporing, so effectively when it's not producing the spores. You wouldn't want your horse to live on bracken, but a few mouthfuls now and then aren't going to hurt. And then the other thing I always notice about people is that you're not allowed to let your horse eat when you're riding it. Like, it's really naughty.
Oh, yeah.
So rude and naughty. Well, I do quite a lot of pleasure rides, and they can be quite long rides, and my horse gets hungry. And actually we'll have done, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles, and we'll come to a really nice patch of verge or grass. And I'll just think, do you know what? You've worked really hard. We'll just have 5 minutes. And sometimes I'll hop off and have a leg stretch, because I've got dicky knees, so I like to stretch my legs. But otherwise, I'll just sit there on him, and we'll have people coming past us. And you can see them looking at us thinking, what on earth are they doing? Why have they stopped? Why are they just letting their horses graze? Why not? Why
Yeah,
not?
absolutely.
It's like drummed into you, this discipline thing. I'm not running a boot camp. He's not in Borstal. If he wants to stop and have a little snack, I don't mind that. That's fine, you know.
I find that smelling poo as well. So whenever I'm out with my horses,
Yeah.
they love to smell poo. And the thing is, what they're doing is all of that poo has all the indicates the hormones that were left in those. So anything like cortisol or adrenaline that's been left in that poo, the horse is smelling it because it's basically going, I need to know if the horse that pooed in front of me on this particular stretch of bridleway, was it running from a wolf or plastic bag or whatever? You know, and is there something that I need to know as I ride along here? Is it a mare? Is she on her own? You know, is it another gelding or stallion in there? And they read so much information. So I've got very much into the habit of letting my horses smell as they go around. It's a bit like having dogs sometimes. You know, I've got a Highland who just is very loves having that olfactory kind of, you know, sense going on. And so just as you go out riding, to a limit, we're letting him just, you know, smell as he goes, and then he snatches bites of things as well. And I actually find the more you let them do it, they actually do get to a point where they don't want to do it all the time, because I guess they're also...
It's not such a novelty.
Not as much of a novelty, and I feel like you're not fighting them. And it's super interesting because I've got a 20-year-old horse as well, Irish sport horse, he was an eventer, and he was stabled for 12 years of his life before I got him. And he just doesn't seem to know how to sniff poo. And it's only in the last 5 years of having him, it's only the last year or so that he's got very good at it. And it's like
interesting.
He had to unlearn a lot of his being so domesticated. From what I understand, he had 4 hours turnout a day as an individual. And so was on his own when he was turned out. So he also lacked a lot of social skills when he was put out in my herd. But it's super interesting. Whereas the Highland pony, he actually came from a fabulous breeder, Grace, who has Rumark, if I'm pronouncing that right, Highland ponies over in Lincolnshire. And she keeps all of her Highlands that she's breeding out on nature reserves. She works with Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust and Natural England there and others. And effectively has them all raised in a normal social herd environment. They get to eat what they need to eat out on those nature reserves. But she combines it with selling them usually as youngsters, and usually sort of mimicking what would be a normal dispersal age. So generally with colts, looking at sort of 1 to 3. With fillies, you're looking at about 2 to 3, 4 onwards. And so effectively she's kind of really mimicking natural environments. And so when I ride Falco by Highland, he's just so in tune with his horse. You know, he is an absolute, almost like being able to have the privilege to ride a horse that is near wild, in the sense that he's so in tune with his environment. And Luna, very much, my 20-year-old, is completely opposite. You know, he's taken a long time, I think, to get back to understanding that he is just a horse and he can be as horsey as he likes. You know, I don't try and change him. I think that's always been what I find the great irony of horse lovers, is we spend all our time trying to convince the animal that we're dealing with not to be the animal that it is. Taking the horse as a horse. And so that's something I feel really passionate about. And I think just linking back to my wider work with NEP and with other estates that I work with, other landowners, when you sit and watch these animals and you see them as their social herd, you see them eating in their natural environment, you just learn so much more than you would, you know, just mucking out stables at your local yard. So one thing we do at NEP is we actually run wild horse safaris, and we take people out and we go and watch the herd and we spend time with them. And we normally talk about, you know, everything from why the horse is used in these nature recovery projects, because that can be quite confusing to people as well. But we're also talking about what they're eating, what species are doing well because they're there, and also what that social behaviour is in that setting. And I think that's really important. And as we said earlier, we're seeing increasing interest from the equine industry now, which is really exciting, where they actually want to come and learn about our horse.
That's amazing.
So they can apply it to domestic situations.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's an angle I've never actually thought of, really. I'm kind of trying to do my small sphere of influence by spreading the word that you don't need to be, an expert ecologist to identify basic species. I mean, years ago, I did my BHSAI, and part of that was you were given a bale of hay and you had to take it apart and name all the different grasses in it.
Oh, wow.
Really? Really?
And that's stuck with me, from the age of 19. And actually, I am a botanist, and that's my passion. So I get quite interested when I see my horse, or he's eating things, standing with his head in the hedge, and I'm sitting there looking at the floor around him. But yeah, you don't need to be. But it would be so nice to see more horse owners understand. I think it's that fear of the unknown. I find it fascinating, Rena, when you were talking about the horses, and my kids call it poo detective when they want to smell the horse's poop on the bridle path.
Poo
But yeah,
detective, I love that.
if you saw somebody with their dog on a tight lead and they were walking them down the street, and every time that dog tried to sniff a lamppost, they got their head yanked away, and no, you're not doing that. You're not doing that. We take it for granted. That's what dogs do. We need to also take for granted and be a lot more relaxed about the natural behaviors our horse wants to exhibit. So my horse, I ride around on the buckle end
Yeah.
in huge open spaces. And he is very mannerly, he's very calm, but he'll be quite happy to just sniff some poop, snuffle about in the hedge. I don't feel like I've got to have him on a tight rein. If we're out somewhere where I can give him a really long rein on a bridle path, and he's like me, I'm busy looking around, looking at the trees, looking at the plants, looking at the birds, seeing what I can see. And he's the same. He's sort of, his ears are pricked and he's looking around. And I think I don't feel the need to sit there and hold you on a tight rein and ride you in an outline. You can enjoy yourself as much as I can. So I'd love to see those behaviours, people become a bit more relaxed about what's my horse eating, what's it doing, why is he doing that? He's not going to run off with you, he's not going to buck you off. He's got a brain and he wants to use it, and he's telling you stuff. He's telling you all the things he can see all the time.
There's a really good YouTube excerpt from Lucy Rees, who's a great horse pathologist. Horses in the Wild, and she's written a really good book, Horses in Company, which is, I think, a must read for all horse lovers.
Great book.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've never forgot her saying, and I have actually sharers, because I've got 3 horses now and who are all ridden, so I have sharers to help me ride. And one of the things that I always drill into everyone is the audacity of a rider to tell a horse where to put its feet out on a trail ride, and it really sticks with me, and it's quite an important thing for me to remember. And it's like, you can be in control of like the overall direction, you can make sure that you're not going to get your head chopped off by a overhanging tree, and you can make sure you're on the left side of the road and you're being safe. But in general, the horse knows its feet, and it knows the terrain better than you can. It's got better field vision. It's absolutely going to know its way around things, and for the most part, there's always exceptions. And just that audacity to tell a horse where to put his feet. And I think a lot of time when I was growing up, on a trail ride, you were told to ride it through puddles, around puddles, up here, up there, this way, that way. You'd pick your way through the mud, because how could the horse possibly know which way to get through the mud? And that to me is completely changed. And the riding at Knepp is quite challenging. We could have a red stag pop up, especially now we're just experiencing the rut. So there's all sorts of testosterone, around in the air with all the deer fighting. And they can just trot out in front of you. You can have cattle, big herds of cattle that you come across, pigs as well, about, and all sorts of things. And it can be challenging. And I think the most thing that I really love from it is that when I'm riding out at Knepp, my horses are all barefoot, so they go through quite quietly as well through the landscape, is we feel part of nature. And I feel like I'm privileged to sit with them as we explore the landscape. And, yes, I might give them some indication which parts of Knepp we're allowed to ride on, and maybe pace a bit if I've got a certain time to get back. But generally it's just such a privilege to enjoy being out with them in nature. I've had things like barn owls weaving in front of me, like literally I could almost reach them.
Wonderful.
I had a kingfisher once almost take off my nose. It just literally flew across.
Wow.
All sorts of amazing bird life and things that I feel like when you're just walking and maybe you're a noisy human group or you're driving through the landscape, you just don't get this. And to be part of that and sort of be part of horses and nature, because that's what the rest of the animals around at Knepp, all those birds and insects and the other herbivores, they all think of horses as part of that landscape. So actually you almost get invited into a sort of secret part of it by being on them. And I absolutely love that. And it's something that I think very few get to privileged to be able to see that and experience that. So it's something that I'm always really passionate about trying to tell people. And if we do recover nature across Britain and across Europe and globally, much more people will have that experience. So many people at the moment are riding on really scary roads, on really, unsuitable riding. And if you can get rewilding projects, nature recovery projects across your landscape, it's just going to open up the possibility to have so much more land to enjoy nature on, really.
Ross, you've done a lot of riding in Africa, haven't you? Where horses are the way to get round, because they're sure-footed, and you've got up close to some really amazing wild species out there as well, haven't you? Because you're on horseback, not in a jeep.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to head over to Africa a handful of times now, and Africa certainly has a special place in my heart space, that's for sure. But the last time I went over was to Zimbabwe in 2023. We made a trip down to South Africa just afterwards, just to see a couple of friends. But the whole point of heading over to Zimbabwe was to do a little bit of teaching. So I did a clinic combined with some conservation work over there, which was really cool to be involved in. With the conservation, the Consultancy over there primarily focusing on black and white rhino. So again, don't disclose locations like this. I always keep that sort of, very stum. It's in Zim, that's all we need to know. But, the use of horses in conservation practices are invaluable because of what they enable us to do in such a low-key kind of way. So, I know you've been over to Kenya, Rina, but in all different areas of Africa, you've got your high veld, which is your high plateau, you've got your grasslands, you've got your low veld, mountainous regions. It's quite humid, it can be hot, it can be warm, it can be really cool. So you've got so many different ecozones in what we would class as a very small space. And for the horses to be able to, have that level of savvy to be able to traverse the different terrains that you get over there, but also help us with a conservation purpose. So, as well as them being no carbon footprint, which is what we like. No carbon footprint, they don't churn up the land, they don't leave tracks and traces behind like you would be doing if you was trying to get to a more inaccessible part of a reserve in a vehicle. They don't leave any destruction like that. They are super beneficial for doing head counts on game, getting to those inaccessible places where, rhino might be hanging out. They're great for checking for snare sweeps because they are on horseback. They are so precise, they are so foot sure, generally speaking, that traversing this kind of landscape is really cool, and it's such a privilege to be able to be involved or have been involved in that area on horseback, because like you were saying, Rina, the way that animals perceive us when we're on horseback is completely different. It is very much like we're at one with nature. And we always need to remember that it's a privilege to be on a horse, not a right. And, like you said, to be able to explore that and how the animals around you perceive you is really, really cool. I mean, over here, down at Nep, there's stag, there's pony. Over in Africa, there's elephant, there's Cape buffalo. Depending where you are, there may be predators, your lion, your cheetah, your leopard, which they weren't present on the reserve. We had 2 cheetah, but they don't perceive horses as prey. They're too large for cheetah. So, it's all very, very cool, the different areas of conservation that you can, the purpose that equine serving conservation in different areas of the world. And just going on to the level of terrain that they have to navigate. Over here, we do spend a lot of time interfering with a horse's proprioception, movement patterns, and so forth. Whereas horses are hardwired to develop movement patterns. And yes, the horses over there, they weren't particularly supple, but they knew their footing. And there's a damn sight difference between a warthog hole over there and a rabbit hole over here. So sometimes the best thing that you can do is give them the agency and let them make their choices, because they'll take you on the safest route possible because they have got 4 legs. We've got 2.
I see a lot of thoroughbred types. I mean, I do the pleasure rides where we can be 120 people in total, maybe. Everyone goes out at their own pace, their own speeds, does the route. But you see every shape and size and breed imaginable of horse. But it's always so wonderful, I think, to see the thoroughbred types out there, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in boots, sometimes shod, or a combination of whatever. And they're quite happily scrambling up and down the slopes and the dales. And we have some beautiful rides in Derbyshire. And you think, yeah, with the native breeds are brilliant, but actually every horse does have to some extent that
Yeah.
ability. And I love it when I see riders sat there with a loose rein and they're letting their horse just pick their way along, up a hill, down a hill, maybe having a little jog or a slow down. And yeah, I just, I think it's fantastic. It's very difficult when you're riding on a road, as you've said, it's hard. We ride in places we don't always want to, but I think when we have that opportunity, definitely just relax and give that horse a bit more autonomy because they're surprisingly clever. These little Exmoors that I took to Cowdale at Buxton the other day, they've been on a relatively flat, good quality field for about 5 to 6 weeks. And the two guys that were with me, our farm manager, who's cow expert, and then one of the other reserve staff, and we let them out, and they both said, "Are they going to be okay? This is such a steep slope. They're going to fall over. They're going to break their legs." And these ponies just scampered straight up. They were zigzagging across. They were then trotting down this bit. They were fine. They
That's
were
fantastic,
sorting
isn't it?
themselves out quite happily. Have a little bit of faith in them. They're not stupid, are they?
No, no. I have a friend of mine lives up in the fells, and she has a little group of horses, and I mean the way they move around on the fell at all times of the year in all weathers, it's using their kind of innate four-wheel drive. It's lovely to see. Really nice.
And I think
Yeah.
it's really quite sad. I mean, Kate, Rena, you both alluded to this, that so the information is out there in terms of research, in terms of books and what we can research online in terms of, you know, horses' natural behavior. But the opportunity to actually see, view, and study semi-feral horses is actually a little bit more few and far between. So
Yeah.
I think, with you guys both saying that, Rena, at NEP, you do horse safaris where, like you say, you do take people out and you do study, which I think is great. Kate, that could be possibly something for the trust and actually for wider conservation projects to embrace because, there's so many benefits of equines being part of conservation and rewilding projects, but actually from an equestrian perspective of being able to observe natural behavior with their own eyes firsthand, I think is going to be invaluable.
Yeah, and there's just so much we can point out to in the field that I think is really hard to, effectively, when I think about people's mindsets and what they're learning as a typical equestrian, let's say, and obviously this equestrianism is huge and vast and there's lots of people within it. But when I'm thinking of how I grew up and I worked at like local riding schools and livery yards, and, I shared a pony where I was working at a dealer's yard when I was 11 to 15. And when you're growing up in that world and when you're keeping a horse at livery and you're sort of governed by how the livery yard is managed, it's really hard to think about what could be different and sort of really to imagine it. But you come to somewhere like NEP and you see we've got about 30 ponies at NEP. We've got them in 2 different herds, and we've got a herd that's breeding at the moment. So they've had 7 foals this year, and we've got a non-breeding herd as well. And to come and see them in situ and for us to kind of talk about, first of all, the pony and how it originated, because I think that's something that is lots of different information about it, and I think because of the native breeds and how some of them are still remaining in Britain, like we've mentioned the fells, there's Exmoor, Dartmoor, New Forest, there's a lot of kind of confusion, I think, about what is a wild horse and what is a managed horse and an owned horse, and then what is a domestic horse. And almost like sometimes I get that people think they're 2 different species, or they just think that how a wild horse lives is so different to how their domesticated horse is. So when you get them to come to NEP and you can talk about all of that and you can point out the similarities and you can point out how you can be inspired by those landscapes and how those ponies live within that environment, that's what I think is really exciting, because I think I'm learning, working in rewilding, people can either love it or hate it. I've met people that are like, amazing what you do, and then people that are like, oh, I hate rewilding because of this, and and there's lots of different views. And what I've really realized is you can't just change someone's mindset by just telling them a fact. So although we
No.
have all this amazing data and things that are coming out, and there was a meta-analysis study recently looking about how horses are managed, and it basically summarised, it was shared by the National Equine Welfare Council of Britain, and this paper, it's looked at lots of review papers, and it's basically saying we know that horses need to live in groups. We know they need movement. We know they don't do well in stables. There's so much to it. We know they need forage, diverse, completely eating all the time. That's how their digestive system works. But even though you're given that and that's what the species needs, or that's a fact, you can still come up with the sort of the anthropogenicness of having a domesticated horse, and but I need to worry about my horse, it loves its stable. I mean, I've heard that so many times. This is great, but my horse loves its stable, it's waiting by the gate at 3 o'clock to bring in. And it's very hard to get people that are so they've seen life through their lens, they've got all of their learnings, and you just can't read, I think, a fact and go, oh, my whole mindset's changed. And actually, Ross, you mentioned African safaris. In 2012, I went out to Kenya, and I went out with Offbeat Safaris to this amazing 9-day adventure. And we were on horseback every day for hours, riding through and getting so close to so many animals. And our guide, the late Tristan Forsby, he was like David Attenborough on horseback. And, I grew up when I was younger wanting to be a biologist. I really wanted to work with animals, and it was marine when I was younger, and I really, really wanted to do that. But I somehow got pushed into business and went along that track. And when I went out on this safari, I was managing a concierge service in London, which was basically for horse riders. So we did lots of horse riding experiences and things for them. And going to Africa, combined with other things that were happening, it just made me realise how much nature enriches our lives, but also horses are very much part of that. And I came back and I was like, I can't do what I'm doing anymore. It's 2012, I was working in Mayfair. I had it was a successful company. We had loads of members. It was, at face value, it was a dream horsey job. But I was just so passionate. I had to do something different. And I basically started an open university degree doing environmental science. And as I said, it was this big unraveling. And ironically, when I left that job and I left the kind of equine sector as commercial, I kind of swore off horses. I think I was a bit traumatized by the equine industry, if I'm honest. And I sort of swore off, and I was like, I'm just going to work in nature recovery. I'm going to work. That's my life plan. Environmentalism, being in nature. And I had one horse still that was on grass livery at the time. And slowly, over the next couple of years, I started to realise that there were the large herbivores were quite a part of it. Especially, I lived close to Knepp, and then I started to manage working with them as a wildlife guide, and I literally just couldn't stop watching the horses. So every time I'd be at work doing the guiding, and we'd see the horses or cattle, everything like that, I'd have to go back out and watch them, and I'd get leave for work, like in 2 hours early to go out and sit out with them in the field. And then at the time, my horse was having navicular. And he actually, I had sold him as a 12-year-old, and I got given him back with navicular as a 14-year-old. His lovely owner that I'd sold him to had, said that she couldn't keep him on, and just gave him back, which was just incredible. And he had navicular, and it basically made me, watching the horses and Knepp, it kind of, everything started linking in. How we were keeping horses was wrong. It was causing so many health issues. And I was seeing this not just in my own horse, but other horses as well. And that's where it all sort of triggered and started. And over 10 years later now, it's still my obsession. And all I can see really is that the large herbivores are not only integral to nature recovery, but actually, as we were saying right at the beginning, there's so much land that horse owners are using. And there's so many, I hate to say it, but quite miserable horses.
Yeah.
No, you're right.
These areas.
Yeah.
And, so coming to somewhere like Knepp or Derbyshire, if you live up near Kate, have a look at them, watch them, and get excited by that. And you can't help but have this big unlearning. It will just happen. And I don't think all the fact, I've got tons and tons of facts that we talk about on our safaris, loads of data. But what I really find is just spending time with these animals is really what you need to do to sort of start your trajectory for this, if you haven't already.
So just out of context, well, just for context rather, so Kate, Rina, the Exmoor herds that you both have at the moment, what sort of, what seems to be their yearly routine? How do you cycle them between sites, and how with the access of what they naturally have to their environment with the seasonal changes, how could horse owners listening to this potentially begin to integrate
Hmm.
elements of rewilding practices into day-to-day living for their horses?
Yeah, I
Rock,
mean,
paper,
there's
scissors.
so much really there in a question.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I would say is the social life is so important. So horses form stable social bonds. They tend to form large herds of mares. It can be 6 to 10. It's a rough size, but it can be bigger. And actually, what we call those kind of natal bands, as they often get called now, they can form more bigger herds with multiple groups in a bigger area. And you see this at places like Wicken in Cambridgeshire, that's got about 100, 150 conic horses, and they sort of form a bit of a super herd, but made up of lots of these different natal bands and these small groupings. Generally, you'd have the males would live in a bachelor group, and one, possibly more stallions would be with your natal band. You know, horses mate for life pretty much. So the stallion is a really vital and important part of the herd. He has a number of roles to play in that herd. He's generally a predator lookout. There's amazing things like when they've studied wild stallions, they've seen that their dentition actually fails before the mares do in that same group, because the stallion spends a lot of his time throwing his head up like a giraffe, looking out for predators. If he sees a likely predator, or, you know, it could be in our country as a dog walker or something like that, he will throw his head up. The mares all around him, they can't afford to waste time like that, you know, throwing their heads up all the time. They've got to be grazing because they're generally raising young, you know, lactating, or carrying a foal, so they need to be constantly eating, so they can keep their heads down grazing while their stallion is looking out. When you can't, in our domesticated systems, you have to go, right, well, you know, I'm not going to keep my stallion or a stallion in with my group of mares. What you can do is acknowledge the mare friendships, so you can keep the mares as a group. And it can be really difficult. The most challenging thing seems to be like if you are a livery, because you're not necessarily in control of the other horses. But if you can try and have what I would call a stable group, and when you're looking maybe at a new livery yard, you're wanting to know how that yard works. And one of the questions, which I think should be just as important as what facilities they have, is, you know, how often are people coming and going from this yard? How are the horses kept? If you can try and have that social structure, your horse will be so much happier, and that affects their behaviour. So just knowing that about social. And if you have a stallion, which, you know, quite frequently people do, or young colts, think about that bachelor group status and how they can actually live. They can live out perfectly happily as long as you've got secure fencing, and they can live with other animals, like companion animals, something like that. If you are mixing females and males together, I have a situation at the moment where I have one mare with 3 geldings. And it's something I'm desperately trying to change, but I'm not allowed to buy any more horses, sadly. Otherwise, I'd buy 3 or 4 more mares, and that would solve my problem. But my partner doesn't think that's a very good idea, sadly. But effectively, if you have something like that, you know, it's really challenging, and you have to think about, you know, what can you do to make this mare's life better? And think about why her behaviour can be quite erratic at times. She's very marish, which I think is the term in the horse world. To me, that's her cry for help, because she is a single female in a male herd. That's her hormones not regulating. Horses weren't actually designed, female horses, to not have pregnancies. So effectively, they're having all of these hormones that keep coming and going in, you know, seasonality, that they wouldn't have had to deal with in the wild. And that can be the reason you get a marish mare, basically. So I don't think you can always solve all these problems just by coming to NEP and looking at the ponies there. But I think just that awareness, and just knowing that actually maybe your problem isn't that a horse is naughty or it's acting out of character or something like that. It's actually, look at my herd structure. What am I doing? We've already talked about diet. I mean, that is a huge thing. Enabling them to eat a diverse plant diet, so important. Having different surfaces, environmental stimulation. You know, our horses are constantly interacting with the environment. They're scratching against tree trunks, throwing themselves on the ground, rubbing against all sorts of things. They're eating all sorts of different, not just plant types, but as we were talking about earlier, some plants are harder to eat and take them longer because they're thistly or they're thorny. Sometimes they're reaching high like a giraffe for oak leaves or for berries up high, and sometimes they're down grazing. So you can mimic that in your environment. If you've only got a system, you know, like a track system, you're giving hay, just simply having hay nets up high, down low, putting a few balls out that might have some trickle nuts coming out occasionally and things like that, you can offer a more stimulating environment. I mean, the list could go on. I'll let Kate, she's going to have lots more as well to add to that.
But yeah, I agree with everything you've said, Rena. There is a lot that horse owners can learn. The thing I would say to any horse owner is go back to your toddler days and ask why. Why am I doing it like this? When I used to work in the horse industry and I went down the BHS route, and it was, BHS is fantastic organisation, but it was back in the day, it was, I hope it's different now, but it was very rigid. This was the way you did it. And then you went out and got a job and you learned how to actually do it, to manage 15 horses in an hour and all the rest. But it's why. Why do we do that? Why does it have to be done like this? The key thing that would be for me, and it has always been for me, keeping my horses, is the yard. Can I have 24-hour
Yeah.
turnout? Can I have you turn out all year round? I do not want to have to bring my horse into a stable. I don't think I've ever been on a yard where I've had to stable my horse at any particular time because someone else has told me to. And in fact, I've had places where I've only had grass livery and I've not had a stable. And you look at our Exmoors, we had Conics previously. Any horse, you'll be amazed what weather they will quite happily stand out in. I'm forever sharing posts on Facebook about how you don't need to rug your horse.
Yeah.
And you don't need to have 5 million different rugs. I think I put rugs on more in the summer when I had put fly rugs on than I do in the winter. Let those horses look after themselves to some extent. The thing about your horse is stood at the gate at 3 o'clock because he loves his stable. Is it because you bring him in and you give him his tea? My horse hears my car. We have a long farm drive to where my horses are, and he knows my car, and all the horses there know their individual owners' cars. It's quite interesting when you're up there and which horses lift their heads before you hear anything, but the other horses don't react. They're purely conditioned that, oh, that's my owner, I'm going to get some food. So my horse is always waiting at the gate for me. It doesn't matter what time I get there, it can vary. And because they live out 24/7, it doesn't really matter what time I get there either, which makes my life a lot easier, a lot more relaxed. But then when he's had his tea, and I'm talking about 2 cups of feed balancer, that's it, off he potters. And my daughter's pony as well. And you turn around, you're chatting to your friend, turn around, he's bumbled back off up the field. He's not desperate to come in. He just associates the car with me and possibly some food. So actually, leave your horse at 3 o'clock, give him his dinner and then walk away. He will not stand at the gate for the next 24 hours waiting for you to come back. He will go off and graze and do whatever. So I just think, the movement aspect, great, again, we see horses that are so fat, so unfit.
Yeah.
Chuck him out. My horse is he's a big cob. He's black and white. He's predominantly white. He's absolutely filthy. He's utterly disgusting because he doesn't wear a rug. And periodically I bath the bits that matter and then I clip because he's a big lad and I like to use the winter to help him lose a bit of weight. I was always taught by a very old horseman, if you can't see ribs coming out of winter, you've done something wrong. Your horse can get ribby, doesn't matter, it's absolutely fine. In fact, they need to get ribby, they need to have that seasonal highs and lows, they need to have, the metabolism needs that stimulation. But yeah, they don't feel the cold like we do. They don't feel the rain and the wet like we do. And you'd be amazed how quickly they can get phenomenally muddy and greasy. And actually, again, if you've got shelter in your fields, you've got hedgerows, they'll snuggle into it. We have 2 of our Exmoors that are the older, tamer. We do keep our Exmoors in 3 groups, and they're settled groups. We've got 4 mares, 4 colts, and then 2 older mares. Now I have put the 2 mares in with the other 4 mares, and I've taken them out again, and that's something that I can do in future. But by and large, we try and run them in those groups. We don't want to break them up. They've got their social bonds, they've got their hierarchy. The 2 mares went up to northern Derbyshire last year over Christmas onto some private owned land, and previously the owners there had horses, so there was a field shelter, and I put these 2 Exmoors out, and they didn't go into this shelter probably more than once or twice in the 2.5 months they were there. They just went and stood against a dry stone wall. There's not many hedges up in the high peaks in Derbyshire. They snuggled against a tree. They just stood there and got wet. They weren't bothered. They didn't want to go in this field shelter. And then we had really heavy snow just after Christmas, and the landowner was really concerned, and my farm manager was, oh, we're gonna have to take some hay up there. No, no, we'll be fine. We don't need to. And I said, but there's 6 inches of snow on the ground. And she sent me a little WhatsApp video because she was so concerned that I wasn't taking this snow seriously. I said, they'll be fine. They're fat enough. They've got 3 inch long, thick fluff. They're super waterproof. And then she sent me a little video of them just digging with their hoof, pushing the snow out the way with their nose or their feet, finding a bit of grass. Happy days. And we didn't give
Yeah, it's
them any
amazing.
hay whatsoever. And I had to really hold my line because I'm getting, in the nicest possible way, for the right reasons, being questioned almost constantly by other members of staff or landowners or people. Are you sure? We can't just give them one bale or give them this or no. Trust me, let's just try it because they're not going to die overnight. And actually, they came off that site. They looked amazing. They'd done a
Oh,
brilliant job for wildlife. They'd nibbled away on the bark of some of the trees. They'd been using them to have a scratch and a rummage. But it helped them shed some of that chub. And for little 12-hound Exmoors that are good doers on sometimes quite good pasture, that was so critical. So I manage their grazing calendar, yes, by the sites, by the needs we've got, yes, by I want them to go to a site and tackle scrub in the winter, but I also think very carefully about how fat they are and where they need to go for the winter. And I generally put them in the south of the county in the summer, in the Trent Valley where it gets very wet and we can't graze in the winter. And I just send them further north as the winter goes on because I know that that's going to be cold and the food's going to be scarcer. But yeah, I definitely say to horse owners, you don't have to keep your horse looking the same all year round. Might cost you a bit more with a saddle fitter. I get my saddle fitter out every 6 months minimum.
Mm.
Just to be sure, because I do like him to get a bit thinner in the winter, and in the summer he just has to look at a blade of grass and he gets rounder. But maybe what I'm spending on the saddle fitter, I'm saving by not having tons of rugs and not bedding. I don't I haven't had any bedding bills in the stable. So
yeah,
that would
it's
be
very
my
true.
main thing for horse owners is, really think about can I let my horse be a horse? If you imagine if your horse was a cow, would you be doing that? Do you drive around the countryside and look at farmers' fields of cows and think, oh, those poor cows, they're out in the rain or the snow? Nope, they're quite happy. So, I definitely, like Rena was saying, anthropomorph, can't say it.
Yeah, yeah, that word.
That
Anthropomorphism.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anthropomorphizing your animals is a bad plan because they're never going to be human. Actually, what you need to do is think more like they do and stop thinking like a human.
Yeah. And I do think as well that side of things has got a little bit more prevalent over recent years because we are disconnecting from nature so much in ourselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
which is a massive topic that me and Amy quite often talk about. But the
mm.
more we disconnect from nature ourselves, the more we fail to see that we are nature,
Mm.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
prevents it, which presents its own challenges.
You keep your horses out, you spend more time outside yourself.
Yeah,
So
that's
my horses are out and I will go and feed them, and then I've finished work and I really need some downtime. So I might potter about and do a bit of poop scooping. I might potter about and mend a bit of fencing. I might just potter about and just go for a walk around the fields.
Mm.
And, as it's dusk, listening to the tawny owl in the trees next to me, watching the rabbits scampering around. There's a fox near us that will trot through the fields. All the badgers have been and dug a few holes. Just listening to the bird song. It's incredible how that recharges your social battery after a day at work or with the kids or whatever. And just listening to the horses wandering around, eating,
Yeah, it's
snorting, making
fabulous, isn't
horsey
it?
noises. It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
Working within your roles, rewilding has got so many benefits, but it must come with a lot of challenges. Are there any challenges that you both respectively find that you come up against a little bit more so?
I think I think a lot of it can be misconception about what rewilding actually is. And, as as Kate was saying, you can get complaints about animals, you can get concern. I know particularly in other parts of Europe, there's been, huge groups that have risen against some of the horses that are kept in rewilding projects. And that is a downside of it. And I think generally my thing would be to say is to be careful around the social media and just taking images off social media and being for want of a better word, a keyboard warrior in your response without actually going. Because I think when you get to some of these rewilding projects, you speak to the people involved and you see the horses in question, that to me, it's sort of the evidence is in how they're looking. I would love our horses at Knepp to look skinny in the spring. We're on old wood pasture. We've got a lot of ex-dairy pastures and southeast of England, huge productivity area. We don't have the massive snow or anything like that. So, our horses tend to, what I would say, be slightly overweight a lot of the year. And it differs in our different blocks. So we have the middle block, which is our breeding herd. And has been quite an aging herd over the last sort of 10-15 years. Thankfully, we've had quite a few young fillies born in the last sort of 3 years or so, which is helping us now, into the future. But for a while, it was, most of them were sort of in their late teens, early 20s. And we also got our southern block herd, which at the moment aren't breeding, but were actually the dams of the lovely 4 colts that you both took up to Derbyshire. And I think the challenge there can be, we're dealing laminitis at the moment. I almost say it's a dreaded word sometimes. It's an epidemic at the moment in the horse world. And I think that's one of the challenges in rewilding is you can be dealing with land that has effectively come from a really, really poor management in the past. And at Knepp, it was old dairy pastures. It was highly fertilised, lots of chemicals applied. And the residue of that has been really, like I said, this high productivity in grass. So one of the things we're seeing at Knepp is our older mares can get laminitis. I actually think it's amazing none of our younger mares do. We seem to, and touch wood for that, but we seem to have really good health up until maybe their older years, and that can be a challenge. What that's taught me actually has been that as long as an animal is healthy, it can actually eat grass in high quantities. And I think the healthiness comes from having that diverse plant diet. A drumming is such an important thing, and that healthy, happy life as well. So we don't have huge challenges with younger members of the herd. It seems to be just these older ones. And I think it's something I'd love to see more research pumped into, because one of the things, and I think you guys have mentioned that on previous podcasts, is there's a lack of research for horses in natural systems.
Yes.
More coming along, which is great. And we are getting approached at Knepp now, actually, by all sorts of equine colleges and universities and equine scientists, as well as general ecology and other people. But I would love to see much more research looking at what's happening with horses in these rewilding projects and conservation projects, as opposed to maybe horses in domestic, and what we can apply from a real scientific level, particularly on things like laminitis. It's so important. There's so much we don't know. I mean, things like something I haven't talked about, but I just find so exciting is, things like clay helps reduce the toxicity by lining the gut. So when horses are eating things like acorns, which has been a huge thing this year, and I've heard of a lot of animals that have not done very well with the acorns around, having clay and actually purposely eating clay can help them line the gut and reduce the toxicity. And there's been studies done on things like macaws and seen that it's reduced the toxicity when they've eaten a toxic plant with clay by as much as 60%.
Wow.
And so that is not studied in horses. So we know nothing about that. And we see all sorts of illnesses that horses can get that just simply no one has applied a bit of that natural sort of approach to it. So I think that's something that's really important. And we welcome, if people want to get in touch with us, they can either go through the Knepp main office or get in contact with me and some of the other projects that I'm working on as well. And if they want to study these horses, we'd be really, really happy to accommodate that. There's so much more to achieve, I think. So rather than challenge, I see it as quite exciting, because I do feel like there's a bit of a momentum at the moment. And there is something that is really churning. I think people are really recognising the importance of keeping horses more healthy in our environments. And I mean, I could go on and on of how important it is to have a really good environment around them. But effectively, if we can get some of the research done and get more peer-reviewed research so that people feel more confident to keep their horses in more natural landscapes, that would be just a huge plus for me.
Yeah, I think challenges for me, interestingly, I get probably more pushback about the use of equines in rewilding from non-horsey people who worry that the horses are going to get cold or wet, or don't they need rugs? And so we're a charity, we have very few staff. We rely very heavily on our lovely volunteers who help us with livestock checking. And as I said earlier, we can have up to 9 different groups of animals scattered across the whole county at any one time. So myself and my farm manager just can't go and visit them, and we need to be seeing them every 24 hours. So we recruit local volunteers and we offer basic training on how to sort of check signs of health in cattle and the ponies. So when I took these 2 ponies up to Buxton the other day, I met this lovely group of people that are going to be the livestock checkers for that site. And you know, the horsey people in the group were like, great, fine, happy days, no problem. The non-horsey people were, oh, will they need a rug? Will they need this? Will they be okay? And it's lovely because they're concerned about their welfare, but they are applying what they see in fields around them, which is lots of rugged horses in neat grass squares, to what we're doing, which is very, very different. I think, you know, yeah, some of the other challenges with rewilding are, what does rewilding mean? And when we first started talking about rewilding at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and I should say the trust is probably leading the way out of all of the sort of 46 wildlife trusts. I'd love to be proven wrong with this, but we've taken a really strong stance on rewilding, and this is the way we are going to manage our land and go forwards. And some of the response was, well, that means it's just neglect. You're not going to do anything at all. So actually using horses, using cattle, having beaver, which Ross will remember in September 2021, I
do.
facilitated beaver being released in Derbyshire, and Ross came along and took some beautiful photos. And also listened to me for months beforehand moan about how difficult it was and how challenging it was getting beavers. We
That was a good time. It was a good time.
But yeah, what's interesting is when we've been accused by perhaps different species groups of not doing enough land management. You know, we're not managing for this particular bird, or we're not managing for that particular butterfly because we're not hands-on doing the practical work ourselves anymore. When we put in these natural processes, which are large herbivores or small, medium-sized aquatic herbivores, then actually people go, oh, okay, well, maybe you're not in there clearing all that willow out of the reed bed, but actually, do you know what? I've just watched the cows march right into the reed bed fringe and go and have a nibble around. And those ponies are out there chewing the leaves off the willow. And the beavers, look what the beavers doing. Rina's done some fantastic work into looking into reintroducing elk, which live on that wetland fringe. So they're kind of the species between the grassland and the wetland, where the beavers and the cattle and ponies are. Elk habitat live in that habitat around the sort of wetland edge. So they can be really good talking points. The other thing is, I've never found anybody that's been offended. Well, no, I tell a lie. Actually, I have found people being offended by our cows and our ponies, but but they are very good talking points. So whilst I might be talking to other landowners or farmers, the minute I can start talking about our livestock and how we use our livestock, and what they do, it's almost like a common denominator. You know, they might be from a real, you know, hardcore, I hate rewilding background. I'm coming at it from the other angle, but we can still find some common ground in there to discuss. And the cows are brilliant, and the ponies are brilliant conversation starters. You know, you can put a picture of a cute Exmoor up eating some hawthorn berries, and on our all staff teams chat, and I'll get 30, 40 likes straight away. Because everybody goes, oh, ponies, yeah, they're awesome. So they can be really good conversation starters as well, about how we can encompass rewilding, how we can let nature restore itself and fix itself by using natural processes, which is our herbivores.
It's really interesting. And how do you see the future? Like, what do you think? How do you think things are going to change in the next 10 years? Does it look positive or?
Yeah, I've got a really optimistic vibe on this. I do sometimes flit and have a few days where it feels a bit more pessimistic. But I think in general, you know, Britain is currently about 189th out of 216 countries globally in terms of biodiversity intactness. We are so low down on the ranking tables, if you like. We're in an awful place. And we've seen a huge amount of loss since, for a long, long time. A lot of the ecological baselines that get measured are around the 1970s, but that was a pretty poor time to start with. But in those declines, we've seen, you know, very high percentage declines in a lot of common species. Things like nightingale, which is a species that has come back in abundance at Nep, you know, that's seen something like a 98% decline since the 70s. And
Wow.
sorry, 2% decline since the 70s. And turtle doves as well, which we hear, you know, and see at Nep every spring, you know, in summer, they've seen a 98% decline. So these amazing species come back. It's really sort of proof is in the pudding, you know, effectively what we're seeing at Nep and we're seeing at other sites that we're working with is just astonishing wildlife comeback. And, you know, you've alluded to this earlier, our connection to nature, we need this. There's all sorts of amazing studies looking at our mental health, our physical fitness, productivity, everything all increases when we have access to outdoors, and how it should be a human right, really, as much as anything. So, I mean, you know, backpedaling a little bit, I guess we didn't really touch on, you know, Kate did a little bit then, but, you know, the reason we use these large herbivores, the reason we want to introduce them as a natural process back in the landscape is because when you look back at our past landscapes, there was an abundant level of diverse large herbivores. So we had the Eurasian elk, you know, or moose as it's commonly known. In Britain, we had wild horses that roamed across the whole of Eurasia. We had aurochs, which was the now extinct species of wild cattle. And these combined with our other native deer, you know, Eurasian water buffalo, all sorts, it made what was like a savanna ecosystem. So what we were talking about earlier when we went on those horse riding safaris in Africa, you know, that is what our ancestors saw in Europe. And one thing I feel really optimistic about is I think the evidence piling up for the need to restore nature for both humans to be part of it, but also for our wildlife and for things like food production, of which rewilding is a huge ally for, is really, really important. And just drilling that back to our horses, it's getting really hard to keep horses in Britain. We're having really wet, warm winters. So things like if you are keeping horses in clay like I do, makes it so much harder to make that ground last throughout the winter. We're seeing really, really high temperatures in the summer. We're going to see that increasing and increasing periods of drought. So actually, if you do start to repair the nature in your environment, your horse is happier as a result, but effectively you're also making your land more resilient. So, you know, one of the things that I think is a really good example for this is things like ragwort, you know, which is almost a dreaded word again, as I said earlier. But when you have ragwort in a field, and you try to manage it, every time you pull up a piece of ragwort or you cut it or anything like that, you're effectively making it from a biannual plant that will die off, you're making it a perennial, so it will come back each year. So you're effectively gardening, if you like, to keep more ragwort in the area. There's thousands of seeds in the landscape and they're going to sit in that landscape. And what they tend to do is they grow really well in overgrazed, disturbed soils. So most horse owners are gardening for ragwort. They're literally, if they were in their gardens, they are putting the right conditions for a ragwort plant to grow. Now, most healthy horses, they won't touch it, you know, it's not a worry. And actually, there's lots of benefits to having a plant like ragwort around. It draws down into the soil, it's got a really long root system, it draws down into the soil and it brings up all sorts of nutrients and minerals that are deeper down in the soil. Other taller plants do that too, so not just ragwort, but having lots of taller plants around that are sort of ragwort height and thereabouts will help draw up all those minerals and nutrients from the soil. If you do that, and if you don't want to be a ragwort gardener and you don't overgraze, you're going to increase your soil layer and you're going to effectively add the vegetation. So things like grass is going to get a lot thicker, more diverse species will grow, and your herb layer will increase as well. So the less that you compact and overgraze and disturb your soils, the better the vegetation will be. And that is going to mean that your horse is going to eat more diverse plants. There's going to be less ragwort because it doesn't do very well in a really thick thatchy sward. Like I say, it likes these disturbed areas. So you're effectively, the longer you manage your land as good for nature, you repair the soils, you let your vegetation grow, you have taller plants around, you're actually going to have a much more resilient landscape that holds more water. And that's going to help you in terms of drought. So your grass will get less stressed. We know that stressed grass creates more sugars, you know, it has more sugars in the roots, especially if it's overgrazed, because the sugar's really low down in the plant. So all of those things, you're effectively going to have a much more healthy environment for your horse. If you combine that with having lots of big trees around that you might plant now, you know, that older age, if you could have planted a tree 20 years ago, that was great, but if not, plant it now. If you're going to plant loads of trees, that's shade. So I would say if you are a horse owner in this country, the first thing you should be thinking about is making sure you have lots of shade for your horses in the next 20, 30 years, if you're going to keep horses in time. So there's so many things you can do. The flies are increasing. We're seeing higher numbers of flies around. Having something like predator insects around, which do really well in taller grasses and thicker swards, you end up getting more of these insects. I will sit and watch a wasp diving into little fly species, so it will literally prey on flies around the horse, and it will just buzz around the horse. And if you've got a healthy ecosystem, you'll see lots of wasps. They're not bothering you in the tack room. You don't need to worry about that. They're out in the fields and they're eating all the flies up. So the best natural fly protection for your horse is having lots of predatory insects around. So I could literally, there's so many of these things. And I think that's what gets me really excited. I think the more that people learn this, the more they're going to change. And the more we change, the more we connect with nature in our landscape, it's going to hopefully bring us up from that 189th place in the ranking. And we're going to go much more higher because we're going to consider nature as an ally, and it's so important that we need. So yeah, I feel very optimistic, but I do think people have to see it for themselves. I think it's really hard to just hear loads of facts or read about it and change your whole mindset. It took me lots of different experiences and learning about all this, all the horses in rewilding, and to actually understand why it is we're introducing the herbivores, why they're an important part of the landscape. So I do think, get out there, enjoy nature, and then start to watch your horse in its fields, hopefully in its lovely enriched area, and watch it use that area. And I think you'll just, get really, really inspired by it and hopefully do more to improve your landscape.
I'd echo all of that. One thing that you mentioned briefly there was about water retention in soils, but equally drainage is very important too. And that's one reason why we're not allowed all year turnout in a lot of places, is the pressure on the land. But as you said, the plants with the deeper tap roots actually also help aerate your soil and help drain it as well. So some of our farmland, some of our own land in Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, is ex-UK coal land that was open cast. There is no topsoil. It is solid clay. We're either up to our knees in mud or we're on baked hard concrete. But by allowing species like dock, thistle, buttercup, ragwort, all the species that, and I see this at my yard, the people that have the neighbouring paddocks, we keep our horses in our own paddocks, our own land, and we've got pretty much free rein to do what we like in them. This summer, do you want your field spraying? No, thank you, I said. I'm not bothered, thank you. Well, we're going to spray for buttercup, and I said, what are you spraying with? I'm always fascinated by what chemicals are you using and why. And well, we're going to spray with this, and then we've got to keep our horses off it for 2 weeks. So we're going to put them in this tiny area and feed them hay for 2 weeks. It's like, why are you spraying it? Oh, we don't want this. This is bad. That's bad. This is bad. Why is it bad? Well, they can't eat it, and the buttercup's taking over, and nobody wants docks, and there's thistles, and there's ragwort. Actually, I'm quite happy to have all of those. If I need to control them, I do it manually with no chemicals. It was really interesting seeing how effective that spraying was, which it wasn't particularly for various reasons. And it's also seeing, interesting seeing whose horses look better for it or whose land looks better for it. Because I haven't sprayed off, I haven't got bare patches, I haven't got areas where I've lost that vegetative cover, so then when it rains, it doesn't scour. I section off my paddock so I have foggage in the winter, so I don't need a lot of hay. So I've only just opened up my foggage area for my 2 horses, and that will keep them going easily through till the end of January, with maybe the odd slice of hay if they have to come in for whatever reason. Maybe if it's a really horrendous torrential rain night, I might bring them in for one night or, something like that. But by and large, they're out. And that point about what is the point of a buttercup? What is the point of ragwort? I think, again, we can get into quite a farming mentality with horses where it doesn't have any benefit for my horse right now, but the oblique benefits, the lateral side of things, where, well, actually, if I've got these species and I've got these invertebrates, these insects coming in, and then that brings these insects in, but they're also eating the flies and the midges that attack my horses. And for people who've got a sweet itch, for example, plant some willows, get rid of those wet, boggy areas, or not get rid of them, but certainly complement them with some willows. You've got some shade, you've got some bat habitat. Bats absolutely love midges. Swallows, house martins, swifts. How can we bring these species back into our yards that have been lost from there as well? So again, thinking holistically rather than reaching for the chemicals for the fly sprays, how can I tackle the problem of having loads of flies in the first place? If I have lots of a nice long grass scrub interface, I've got lots of spider species, lots of
Yeah,
predator
yeah.
insects. They're going to eat those flies. No brainer. Like Rena says, plant a tree. I've actually got some shade, so maybe my horses can stay outside all year. There's shade from the wind, the rain, and also the sun in the summer as well. So it's thinking long term, but it's also thinking bigger picture. And that's something that we in the conservation industry have been trying to do and encourage others to do for many, many years is landscape scale recovery. Species don't care what county they live in, what local authority they live in, what boundaries we're putting on them. They just want somewhere to live. So try and think bigger all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I'm from my background, I used to work in process improvement and project management back before I got into hooves. Um, so that's still very much my mindset. And it's that whole kind of why are we treating the symptom rather than finding the root cause of the problem, fix the root cause of the problem, and everything else falls into place. Whereas otherwise, this constant symptom management, you're in a battle all the time. Like you never fix the
You're
problem.
absolutely right. You're generating new problems. But an approach we take when we speak to landowners and farmers is to explain the cost involved. So the cost of this chemical that these other people at the yard bought in and the time and okay, the diesel, the guy's retired, he trundled around on his tractor, but there's still a cost to that. I didn't spend any money and
Mm,
I am in a very similar position 3, 4 months on than they are. But also longer term, I'm probably in a better position because my horses are going around now chewing off the heads of the black knapweed that's had a fantastic year with it being hot and dry. The thistles, they're lovely, lovely picking off the seed heads, but so are the goldfinches as well.
Yeah.
They're coming in and
mm.
eating them as well. So you can actually save a lot of money by not knee jerk, I've got a problem, I must fix it. And we live in that society, we all do, we all have it at work. There's a problem, what's the solution? But
Mm.
sometimes just stopping and thinking, is this actually the problem, or is it a symptom of a bigger problem or an underlying problem? And how can I approach this laterally? And 9 times out of 10, you can actually do it for a lot less
Mm.
money as well, which is, a huge driver. And I think, again, the price of hay, a lot of people are panicking about the price of hay this winter. Some places have had really good hay crops, some places not so good. But again, if you can think about rotating your fields, if you can think about having natural browse, if you can also accept the fact that your horses aren't going to have as much to eat this winter, but they're not going to die. They're just going to burn a bit of chub and come out looking better for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important mindset shift, isn't it? I mean, working with feet, it's constant. As you were saying, Rena, about the laminitis, it's a constant battle and that changing people's mindset that your horse doesn't need to have this thick covering of fat over its ribs all year round, and that actually from a metabolic perspective it's so that they are meant to have this sort of cycle, rather than just
Mm.
start the year a bit fat, end the year even fatter, and
And I'm definitely
the
not advocating leaving horses without food. I do not want to go
no
down
no
the
no no
route of
no
ulcers and
no
all the rest. But I mean, I got an email from one of the feed companies whose balancer I use, and I'm part of their Fat Pony Club. And they sent an email, top tips to make your money go further this winter. And they were talking about using your forage carefully and making sure you don't just feed it on the floor and waste it. They're very much advocating, yes, we want to make sure horses have got something in their tummies because we know, long periods and stomach acid and all the rest, but it doesn't have to be grass and it doesn't have to be best quality hay.
mm,
So there are
yeah.
ways to make your budget go further and also help your horses waistline and just their overall health as well. Can I
Yeah.
just quickly ask Rena a question? I was really interested when you raised the laminitis issue. Are these in breeding or non-breeding mares?
So we've seen them in our breeding herd, but in the really older mares, so sort of 18 plus.
Did you think
And
they'd passed the point of breeding at that point? Have they naturally become sterile or they're infertile?
the we've lost
Mistake.
two this year who were in their late teens, and they weren't breeding in the last year, I believe. The last foal one of them had was 3 years ago. So we tend to breeding is one of our methodologies, if you like, for knowing that we are keeping horses moving. There's all sorts of movement that they do in terms of if they're lactating, they're going to be looking for water more, they're going to be grazing more. And if they've got youngsters around and males, as in the stallion, around as well, they will be moving. We have had challenges with coexistence between horse riders and stallions at NEP. So it's been one of the challenges that I've been working on for the past 6 years. We've done some amazing mitigation. We've got some fantastic horse riders at NEP actually that are part of what we call the NEP Exmoor project. So they've actually signed up to have access to lots of riding across the estate, but on the sort of provision that they work with us with our Exmoor herds. But yeah, the laminitis we're only seeing in the older mares. And to me, I think there's a lot of work for us to do. We've had discussions internally. We have an amazing local equine vet that we work with. We talk to lots of other projects, so people like Carol at Wick and Fen, who's got a wealth of knowledge, having worked with Connex now for the last 20 odd years at the National Trust property there. And as I said, we're hoping to collaborate with lots of scientists if we can about this. We don't like to lose any mare, but I think to lose two out of quite a large herd of nearly 20 in the last, and they've got to a certain age where they've lived on the project their entire lives as well, with their mother, with their sisters, with their daughters. I don't see it as a huge welfare issue, but I think it is something we want to explore. Interestingly, our Southern Block herd, which arrived in 2020, so in the COVID year, they spent a lot of that first year just bombing around the site, and they kept themselves really lean. I remember being so nervous because they arrived from a really a rough area of grazing on the Cornish moors, and they came to NEP in March, which to me was like, the grass is really growing, and it's a terrible time to do this. But they actually spent so much time running around, they kept themselves really lean, and to date they've managed to keep themselves very healthy, and we've only had 1 year of breeding them. So we know that breeding isn't the only thing, and quite likely our Southern Block of NEP, it's about 1,100 acres, of which the horses only hang out in about 300 acres actually. They don't utilise the whole 1,100 acres. They have access to a lot more diverse plants and lots of different terrain and things like that. So we think that is, and also it's a busier environment. So there's a lot more to move away from, people with dogs, safari groups, horse riders, all sorts. So they seem to be moving a lot more. We also know, I talked about earlier benefits of things like clay. We know, that is really healthy for them. There's loads of plants they're eating. There's antimicrobials as well, in they're picking up from the soils and the grasses as well. And I think a big area to expand knowledge on is the gut biome. And I think it's something that I would like to explore more. We have had conversations with Equibiome, who provide sort of gut analysis. And that's something that if we could either get funding or if we could look to have a research project we'd love to explore that a little bit more, because there's a whole wealth of knowledge on ponies that Carol, the Cardinaux, I think that, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but the Welsh ponies, I know you've mentioned before, Amy, that they've done a lot of the gut biome, and I think that is going to be real key to understanding the health. We've also had Bonnie Mealand, who's an amazing horse ethologist as well, and podiatrist, and she's come down to NEP and she's done things like dissections of, when we did lose a mare, she did a dissection of her hoof, and that was actually showing an incredibly healthy hoof. The two mares we lost recently, we had our vet do a dissection, and he did say that is how he realised that the lamini was the problem in those two older mares. So the healthy mare was a Southern Block, the two lamini was in our much richer Middle Block. So I think there's just a lot for us to learn. But in general, we get very few unhealthy horses at NEP. And majority of them have so much free access to as much grass and vegetation as they want to eat. and definitely throughout the summer months at least are always looking a little bit overweight to me. So it is an interesting thing that I think we just have so much more to learn on.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see and hear about the research that comes as a result of all of that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get some good papers out in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, if not sooner.
And I think there's definitely one question which I know a few clients of mine have mentioned over the years, and I think a lot of people might be, thinking this when listening to the podcast, is about the choice of breed. So there is always a lot of public response to the choice of breed, whether it's a native breed or a non-native breed, and what are their individual purposes, strengths or weaknesses within certain projects, and if that plays a part in the horses that you have chosen.
I've come a lot full circle on this, actually. When I first started working in nature recovery projects, it seemed to me that breed was what we talked about a lot in terms of rewilding horses and nature recovery, conservation grazing projects. Actually, what I'm coming to more now is it's more about provenance and health of individual animals. So there was an amazing paper out, I believe it was Ludwig Orlando, who's an amazing geneticist for horse basic domestication and archaeology, and looking about how horses moved across Europe. And we know there were 4 clades of wild horses, Eurasian wild horse, that roamed all across Eurasia. But it was one clade in particular that was from the sort of Russian area, the Volgas River area, that domesticated animal, I think it's about 4,000 years ago, I'm not 100% sure, that domestic clade slowly overtook all of the other wild horses. And when I say overtook, it was basically the culture of this domesticated, so people having horses and riding them, using them for warfare and exploration and all that sort of thing. They ended up having their own horses. What happened is, in Britain, we lost wild horses about 9,000 years ago. From what we know, this is just what we know from the fossil record. You can never be 100% sure. And it looks like that we had horses introduced, these domesticated horses, this clade that moved across Europe, moved into Britain. And slowly, because people were keeping them very wild, and we can look at nomadic herdsmen today, places like Mongolia, about how they keep horses in more herd environments, but still utilize them for things like milk, meat, riding, that kind of thing. They would have kept these horses very, very naturally. And those horses would have had lots of local adaptations. And that happened all across Europe. So we've got the horses down in Iberia. They're very different to, say, our Western Europe, Exmoor ponies, that kind of thing, and the fell ponies. And then the more Nordic kind of countries as well, Norwegian fjords, that kind of thing. So we know that this kind of domestication happened. What this paper looked at was actually the genes. And with all of these native breeds, the main genes that from what I understand, were affected was the lumbar region of the back. It was increased with strength because we wanted to use them to ride, for warfare, for farm work, that kind of thing. And also their aggression was reduced. Other than that, everything about the pony or horse, everything about horses in general, has been, with the exception of, in the last very recent few hundred years, where we've been doing things like breeding for speed and competition and that kind of thing, from a general native breed stance, those horses have been adapted to the local environment to suit the conditions of that local environment. And their gut, hooves, morphology, everything, all their physiology is all identical to the Eurasian wild horse. This is what makes them such a prime candidate for nature conservation and rewilding projects. So from that point of view, it's really easy, when we introduce animals, to say this animal will suit everywhere. So just going back to the question of which breed, what I would say is look at your habitat of where you're introducing them. What have you got? Are you up in the fells, or are you down in Exmoor, or are you in the southeast like we are at Knepp? And, can you find the most suitable horses that maybe have grazed a similar landscape, grazed and browsed? They've been in that similar habitat. They're healthy. Ideally, you want mixed age structure. So you want to have certain different ages, or you want them to complement them if you're putting them together, and putting them together slowly so they integrate. You're wanting to look at the social, so set up in a good sex ratio as well, like I was saying before, about remembering that they're mainly female herds or bachelor groups. And that to me is the best thing. So if that happens to be conics, because say you're in East Anglia, close to Wick and Fen, similar landscape, and you can remove a whole social group of the Wick and Fen conics and move that to your site in East Anglia, great. If you're One of the sites I've got is in Somerset, a lot of wood pasture, forested landscapes. I would look at moving Exmoors potentially, or maybe New Forest ponies even, to that area. You'll also think about recreation levels. So breed, there are anecdotal things we hear in Europe quite often that when they've imported Exmoors are more standoffish towards humans, moving through the landscape on either cycling or walking or riding, than the Conics are. But we don't know if that's just the Conics are in that environment, because we haven't seen that in places like Wicken Fen or some of the other Conics greys. So I think what happens is horses adapt super, super quick. But if you can get the healthiest start by choosing the most appropriate animals, and just thinking about it, you're not thinking about breed standards either, because quite often some of our best ponies at NEP, we've had the most amazing mare who has been at NEP the whole time I've been there, longer. She's in her teens now, and she's produced some really lovely foals, but she's unregistered. She doesn't actually meet Exmoor standards. And so, there's lots of nuance to it really than just simply going, this is the right breed. The good thing of that is acknowledging that actually, just bringing it back to domestication, the majority of our domesticated horses can, to some extent, survive rewilding. And I lost a most beautiful horse who's 27 and last a couple of weeks ago now, my Brannan, and he was an Irish sport horse, so he was half thoroughbred. And I have had him conservation grazing in the sides of river fields with grass up to here, so much diverse plants. He had really poor feet. He was the one with navicular that I mentioned. And, he went on barefoot transition and everything. And he was literally like this 16-1 conservation pony. And I actually had two small fillies from NEP join my herd at one stage. It used to make me laugh, because when we were grazing some land for a council, this was previously to me renting land at NEP. And it would literally be this 16-1 Irish sport horse on this council nature reserve alongside two little Exmoor ponies, a Highland, another Irish sport horse, and a quarter horse cross. And all of them were doing fantastic. They were in such good condition. They were just, amazing. So any breed can do it within reason, I think, is probably what I'm saying.
There can sometimes be some very interesting political, with a lowercase p, factors. So you mentioned the Carnethy ponies breed in Wales. There was a project in Wales where the local people would not engage with a rewilding project because they were using Conics.
Yeah.
And they wanted to see Carnethy ponies. So they had to remove the Conics. They actually went to another, we nearly got them at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, but actually somewhere else they went to, they were really happy with them, so they kept them. Exmoors are very popular amongst the rewilding passionate people, because they're considered to be possibly one of the older native breeds and showing some of the most prehistoric traits and behaviours. But I actually agree with Rina that any horse can be rewilded. So I've rewilded my horses because I make them live out all year round without rugs, and I make them forage, and I don't pamper them, and I've seen the benefits on the land where they are, and I've seen the wildlife thriving there as well. So definitely any breed, but I have to say the Exmoors are great because they're small. So you don't tend to have a problem with dog walkers because they don't feel as threatened by them as a larger horse. You can cram 4 of them in a cattle trailer quite comfortably and move them side to side. So logistically, when there's 2 of you managing 50 plus animals, you've got to think about how many trips a day you're doing in terms of how much they can eat, or how much water they drink. Standing out in weathers all year round. I mean, I used to have a Highland as a kid, and I would dearly love to have Highlands because I just think they're a fantastic breed. But there's a lot of Highlands that have been bred for the breed type and actually are really a bit nesh, dare I say. We saw this once. We bought some Highland cattle in, and they came from a really great breed line and a great breeder. They were rubbish. They just stood at the gate and mooed and went, no, take it back to the barn. So to some extent, it's conditioning as well. It's what those animals are happy to do. But yeah, I think if you chuck them out and let them get on with it, they will surprise you how well they will cope. But sometimes the breed type can be, it has, you've got to be careful with working with different landowners, and they don't want a non-native breed. The breed societies can be quite vocal. You go down to Exmoor, there are a lot of Exmoor ponies on the moors there. Possibly you could say, I've heard people say too many. They're actually overgrazing. But what's the market for those ponies? The reason they're so small is because they were very popular as pit ponies. So they bred them to be small, compact, and strong. They could fit down a mine. The smaller you can make the pony, the less big you have to make your mine shaft, less digging, less prop shafts, all the rest. Lots of practical reasons for it. And they make great kids ponies, but they actually could be, really great adult ponies, but not many adults want to be riding around on a 12-hand pony. So the market for them, there's a lot of ponies down there. So that's another reason why they're sort of very popular amongst conservation grazers, is because there's a really plentiful supply as well. Well, I don't know how much longer we've got, but that would bring me on to a very contentious topic of should we eat horse meat in the UK? And actually have a market for horses. But there we go. That's another one altogether. I'm not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this has been absolutely fascinating. And I could spend the whole of the rest of the evening chatting to you ladies. But I don't want to keep you for the rest of your evenings. But I mean, I'm sure Ross would concur. It would be lovely to have you both back on again.
Absolutely.
To kind of explore some different topics and get in a bit more into some of these topics. Maybe, Ross, what we should do is we should go out and do a site visit, and then do some podcasting on the back of that. I think that feels like a good plan.
You'd be very welcome. We'd love that.
Next awesome, and I'm back working with the Exmoors next week, so you should come along.
There we go. Yeah. Well, yes, we'll have to work it out when you're going. That I've got some time to come and look. But I mean, it's
very welcome.
It's so interesting, and I have a whole list of other questions that we didn't get anywhere near talking about. So we definitely need to have you back. But
and if
thank you both.
Have any specific questions, or there's lots of angles. We've covered a huge amount of angles really. But if they wanted to go down the route of helping their horses and themselves become a little bit wilder and more in touch with nature, very happy to talk about I think Rena and I both manage our own personal horses in a very similar way to the way that we manage our conservation grazing horses. There's not very many differences, surprisingly. So very happy to do it again.
So Kate, Rena, where can we find you both online, and what sites can we come and visit to find the horses in your care? Not your own personal horses, but the rewilding horses. That'd be a shock.
So I have a website, rinaquinlan.com, and I'm on Instagram mainly as at Rina Quinlan. So the best place to get in contact or via email. And LinkedIn actually as well. So very happy to connect. In terms of horses under care as such, well, I've got Knepp Estate, which I am based at, like I said, with my own horses, and I ride around there, and we've got the 2 Exmoor herds. There's loads of public footpaths that you can actually go onto the knepp.co.uk website and find those footpaths. You can also come on a wild horse safari. That would be brilliant. We've actually got bookings open for next summer now. Lots of other sites that are in development. So some really exciting work I mentioned earlier, Chester Zoo, Forestry England, Nattergal sites, and all sorts. So lots more, and I do post about that when I can on social media.
Wonderful.
I tend to hide in a field more than not. I must admit, I don't have a huge social media presence either as myself or through a work. But the best way to get me is via Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. So obviously Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, we have our own website, but we also have a Wild Solutions website, which is the company within the company that I work for, where we are looking for wild solutions for anybody's land. So definitely check out that website as well. And one day I might get round to having a LinkedIn account if Ross shows me how to do it.
We can do that.
He's 20 years younger than me. He can understand technology.
Honestly, keep away from it.
Yeah.
For anyone wanting to come and see the Exmoors, Kate, where can we find them?
Oh gosh, I mean that's a good question, because they can be anywhere and everywhere, can't they? Oh, gosh, that's a really difficult question to answer because we probably graze about upwards of 12 plus sites with these guys now, and in fact, I'm taking on even more sites in the new year for them. So I would probably say Wild Solutions website. Um, there's more information on there about our livestock and our work and our beavers and all of those things. And probably the best thing to do is drop me an email and say, where are some of them now? Because, so we've got three groups. They're all out at different places at different times. At the moment, we've got some north of Buxton, some south of Buxton, and some near Ilkeston. But at any point, they can be moving anywhere.
I'd also love to come up and see the boys at some point and see how they're getting on.
Yeah, they're grand.
I'll
They're
be certainly emailing you
very
at some point.
cheeky,
Yeah.
very funny. We had a visit from Warwickshire Wildlife Trust the other day who really want to get their own livestock, and their new farm manager was able to come and help us with our all herd TB test for the cattle, and the four colts are at that farm base at the moment. So we went and had a chat with them, and he'd been down to Nep as well. So he was like, "Yeah, I heard all about these guys from Pat and Toby," and like, here they are.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Amazing.
they're
Oh.
fab, and just getting to know all their individual characters and personalities.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
It's
Yeah.
so lovely when we do move ponies on from Nep, and it usually is the youngsters, not always just the young colts, but usually it is sort of the young ones as they would be dispersing, and just finding out how they're getting on. It's so lovely, and particularly I just personally really love it when they've gone to rewilding and nature recovery projects, because I know they're kind of living in a similar life to what they would have stayed on as at Nep. So yeah,
They're doing a brilliant job, I have to say. They're doing a fantastic job. They really are. They're great poster boys.
Love that.
Well, Kate, Rina, thank you so much for coming on this evening. I hope you've both enjoyed it. Me and Amy are obviously a little bit brain boggled by the wealth of information.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you both. We will definitely have a part 2.
Brilliant.
So
Fantastic.
I usually wrap up with some kind of inspirational quote, but I don't think we need one today. So
No.
For everyone tuning in, thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.